Welcome back to the Empire Builders podcast. Dave Young here with Stephen Semple, and the topic you whispered in my ear today is not a brand name. It's not a service. It's not an invention. My favorite word to describe this is President Bush, the young one, the W, right?
Okay.
But he called it strategery.
Strategery.
You want to talk about strategy today?
I do.
Or strategery.
Strategery. Well, and if you think about it, this whole podcast, every episode is really about looking at a business and strategically, what did it do that made itself really successful? And I get kind of a bit frustrated because a lot of times businesses don't invest in strategy, right? They don't want to have a strategic session and invest in that. We all know that strategy ends up becoming really important. And then there's lots of things that are being paraded around as strategy that frankly aren't strategy. They're other things. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about what strategy isn't, and how you create it and why it's important. And basically, I think it distills down to this, is when people sit around in a group and go, hey, let's think about this thing that we can then parade out to people in an industry. We'll have this idea. That's not strategy. That's best practices.
Okay, yeah.
They're best practices because we're looking at, here's the best things that have gone on in the industry. Those are best practices. If it's something that's really common, it's a tactic. It's not a strategy because a strategy can't be repurposed. Because what a strategy is a business looks at its problem. I've got this problem. I have these assets that I can leverage. And here's a creative way in which I can use these assets to solve this problem. Now, what often ends up happening is it solves the problem so well that they then systematize the solution, and now it becomes a best practice. And then that best practice gets so adapted in the industry, it becomes a common tactic that everyone does. And that's what happens. But for it to be a strategy, it can really only be used in that situation.
Okay. Can you give me some examples?
Great examples. MM Lafleur, right? So they kind of invented this whole idea of mailing out clothing to people on this subscription basis where they then try it on and send it back. They didn't start off going, hey, let's do this. They had a problem. They had clothing and they couldn't find a place to store it. But because they had been doing these private fittings, they had an asset. And the asset was, we have the contact information of all these customers, along with their sizes and their preferences. We can actually send clothing out to them that we think they would like. They did it to solve a problem, and in the process, made more sales in a month than they had done in the entire history of the company. They then went, let's turn this into a thing. Let's systemize it and make it actually our business.
Yeah, I looked it up. It's episode 54.
Thank you. But that was looking at their problem, looking at these unleveraged assets, and solving it in a way in which had not been solved before. That is strategy that then actually turned into a business model for them that, look, other businesses have also since copied. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a best practice or a tactic yet, that strategic solving of a problem. We see it with customers. Roy Williams, our founding partner, who really, I don't know that he invented, but really leaned into the whole idea of home comfort clubs and the home services industry. They didn't exist 20 years ago. What was the problem? Okay, you've got a heating and air conditioning company, and you've got this huge problem in the shoulder seasons in terms of keeping your people busy and generating cash flow. So what do? Create a monthly subscription program. What's the unleveraged asset? Not enough people are having maintenance being done. Yeah. If I put them on a program, I develop that cash flow. They're now a customer. I send out my technicians in the shoulder seasons.
It lets you keep them on staff. It levels out some of your income so you don't have these really hungry periods where people don't need furnaces and they don't need air conditioners.
Yeah, and if you did it, which was strategic, then it became best practices. Now it's pretty much a tactic that is used by pretty much every home services company. You see it with plumbers, you see it with heating air, you see it like it is. Yeah. So it went from strategy to best practices when not many people are using it, but the most successful are, then to a tactic that is pretty much across the board.
when it hits that phase, when you start looking at strategy, you've got to now come up with something new, something different.
That's my view. Is my view as a strategy is something where you are solving, because in other words, I don't have any tactics I can use. There's no best practices. So therefore I've got to come up, I've got this problem that I can't solve, which means I need to find a new way to solve it. And Dave, you've referred to this often where you call it business topology. Because one of the ways that those problems are solved is you can look at other industries. And you can look at, I like calling it as the shape of the problem. You like using business topology, which I think is a better. But is there a business in another industry that had a similar problem? How did they solve it? And then, can I solve it that way? That's a unique way to solve the problem because the industry's never done it that way before.
Right. Even if you're in like this air conditioning business, doing something different. I know another client of Roy's. They stay open till midnight.
Right.
Right. They'll send a truck to your house at 11 p.m. at no different charge than if they came at 3 p.m. because that sets them apart.
That sets them apart.
Not every company's willing to do that. They want to charge you for after hours and make it an emergency kind of a call.
Right, because sometimes the problem can be, how do I differentiate myself? How do I differentiate myself? Well, you differentiate yourself by doing something different. Or there's this, we've talked about this before, there's this friction. There's this thing that's here. Well, what's a unique way to solve it? How has somebody else solved that friction point before in a different industry? Kinko's went 24/7 in their operations because they saw what it did for convenience stores. And they applied that idea to a company that photocopies and prints things and whatnot. Strategic. That was a business topology one. How do we set ourselves apart? Oh, look, convenience stores did this, and this really set them apart from other, from grocery stores and made them successful. We're going to do the same. Kinko's was really interesting, actually. I would really recommend people go back and take a look at the Kinko's episode. But what I'm saying is strategy can really set you apart, but how strategy is done is for solving a problem that you've been unable to solve using tactics or best practices.
Yeah.
And then you start with, okay, what's the problem? And then you start looking for assets that you can use to solve that problem. That's one way you can do it. Or you do the business topology where you look out to the rest of the world and go, is there somebody else who solved this in a different industry? How have they done it? How can I now apply that to mine? Or you do a crazy Ivan, like an M.M. LaFleur, where she just threw a Hail Mary and said, let's just ship these things out to people.
Yeah.
Like we got nothing to lose at this point.
Stay tuned. We're going to wrap up this story and tell you how to apply this lesson to your business right after this.
Hey, Rick, I'm glad we got out again.
Yeah.
What's going on?
My digital advertising's got more expensive, and it doesn't seem to be working as well.
I see.
Nice drive, by the way.
So?
I don't know how I'm going to keep growing. I feel like I'm going sideways, flattening out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you speak to Stephen?
You mean this podcast host?
Yep.
Not yet.
Do you like going sideways?
No. I want to be growing.
Well?
Starter session.
Yep.
5 iron?
Sure. Oh, and you can book your free starter session on this podcast website.
Your turn, Dave.
Let's pick up our story where we left off, and trust me, you haven't missed a thing.
So sometimes it's a Hail Mary pass, and you're like, oh my God, that worked.
That was strategic, as it turns out.
As it turns out. But in a way, even a Hail Mary pass is because you're trying something different.
Yeah.
And she was leveraging an asset that she had. The one thing that I have that a department store does not have or a brick and mortar retailer has is this information, this database, this unique database. Let's leverage that.
Yeah. A couple of things that I love. It's the problem topology. And I love, we call it an uncovery. And it's that time when you go visit a client in their market. And often a client will say, well, what questions are you going to ask me so I can have answers prepared beforehand? And I don't have an answer for that. Like I have sort of a list of things I want to know, but I don't want them writing the answers down. And I actually don't want them thinking about it beforehand, because what I'm looking for is a moment where they show me an unleveraged asset.
Yeah.
They have this database. Oh, they have something else that's just sort of unique to them because of how they do things
Yes.
that you can then turn around and utilize as a strategy in messaging, and it truly does set them apart.
And that's what we do in like the first part of the uncovery is, the bold idea day, and then we go and then uncover the stories. So that bold idea day is the discovery, is that one day where we discover that. And the reason why I call it bold idea rather than strategy days, well, first of all, like I started off at the beginning, people are not interested in strategy. I don't want strategy. I just want my problem. I just want to differentiate myself. I just want to make more sales. So I named it different, just simply because people are like, well, I do want that bold idea that's going to separate me from everyone else. So I called it Bold Idea Day. But really, the test is it something that no one else is doing? If it's something that's no one else is doing, or it's something that even just makes you a little nervous to do, that actually by definition is bold.
Yeah.
I did a really interesting one recently where somebody was like, said, oh, I came up with that idea 3-4 years ago. I said, great. So why aren't you doing it? You thought it was a great idea. It's 4 years later. You're not doing it. What was the preventer? So what we ended up doing on that day was breaking down all the barriers that he had that had prevented him from doing it. So then now he can go forward and actually do the idea. But the problem was they hit a couple of things that made them nervous and they stopped. And I'm like, of course you're going to be nervous and you're going to stop because you're looking around in your industry and no one has done it. That's what actually makes it bold, right? So there's a certain part where you got to just go, all right, I'm going to have the bravery to do this thing. We did one with a landscaper. We created a service for this landscaper, which I don't know in the end whether they decided to stick with this name or not. I think it was named something different, but it was My Daughter's Having a Wedding. That was the name of the service. Now, it was this idea that he would come to your home, intensely spend, I can't remember whether it was a month or 2 months, like making your yard perfect. Okay. Now, here's what I want to tell you. The average customer, when you're going and doing residential lawn care services, is like $3,000-$4,000 a year. He charged $15,000 for this service. And in the first month he was promoting it, he sold 2.
Okay.
Now, strategically, what did this do? It was a new service to sell. But more importantly, what did that convey to the marketplace in terms of the quality of his services?
Right.
It was actually not about selling the $15,000 package. We were fine if we had sold 0 of them. Because guess what also happened? His regular service went up because everybody goes, oh my God, you're that good that people pay you this much money to do this and you can actually do this? And it's like, yes, I can.
Yeah.
But it separated him from the marketplace.
That's really what you're looking for.
And his unleveraged asset was the guy is actually really good at it. And I said to him, can you actually make it perfect? He said, yeah, I would just have to go every day. Like I'd have to resod, I'd have to do this, I'd have to do this, I'd have to be there every day. And I said, great. So what would you have to make on that? He goes, oh, no one will pay it. I'd have to charge like 15 grand. Great. We're charging 15 grand.
Yeah.
So strategy is really important and best practices is good, but best practices was something that's done by the leader. And so you're playing a bit of follow the leader. Not that it's not effective, but leadership comes from strategy. And strategy is doing something different. And you can either form a strategy by solving a problem using unleveraged assets in a unique way, or doing like what we recommend in this podcast, learning as much business topology as you can, looking at another industry and bringing how they solve that problem to your industry, which then creates solving of the problem in a unique way. That's strategy. And then what will eventually happen, everybody will start copying you. That's best practices. And then eventually it just becomes common everyday tactic. That's how it moves down the chain. But I wanted to define it just because it gets so misused and is so important that I wanted to put it out there. And then the last thing I want to say about this is if you are in that situation and you're seeking strategy, it's really hard to do in your place of business. There's just something mentally, and I've seen it over and over again. Anytime I've tried to do it at somebody's place of business, it's never been magical. And don't even just go to a different meeting room. Go somewhere completely different. Like enjoy some good food and enjoy some good, and that's when it comes. And it won't come fast. It's a day. Like there's just something about you got to put your brain just in that different place. Book the academy for a day and go down to the academy for a day. There's lots of interesting places that you can book that are not traditional meeting spaces that you can do. Heck, even if you rented a really interesting Airbnb for the day and hung out there, that would be good.
We've done it at least once a year for the past few years that I've been at Wizard Academy, where we leave the Wizard Academy campus for a couple days.
Yes.
And we just go wander somewhere, and it's where we've had some of our best ideas.
Absolutely.
Like one that popped into my mind is go to a pool hall.
Yeah, there you go.
Play pool, shoot pool, but don't play by rules. Just somebody breaks, and as you just are wandering around the table shooting balls in, nobody's keeping score, right? So you're not having to keep track of something external, but you're doing this activity while you're conversing. And it just lets your brain think of other things.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. Just putting you in that different space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Often you need to have an outsider involved.
Yeah, an outside perspective does help.
Yeah, we always say you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle. So somebody that's an outsider can often hear your stories and say, "Oh, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? Oh, gosh, we never have."
Yep. Well, and that's the value I find. Like what I do is I'm a member of a program called the Strategic Coach, and I go once a quarter. And guess what? I'm meeting people all the people in the class that I share with that once a quarter are different industries, different people, and that outside perspective brings me a lot of just explaining things to somebody else brings clarity to yourself. So thanks for letting me take the time to share this with you, David.
Fun episode on Strategery. Thank you, Stephen.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please share us, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and leave us a big, fat, juicy 5-star rating and review. And if you have any questions about this or any other podcast episode, email to questions@theempirebuilderspodcast.com.